Last night I watched video after video of farmers who might lose their farms because the government is reneging on contracts they wrote with these farmers. Hi guys, my name's Will, your favorite rural campaign and elections expert, and let's talk about it. Now the problem is President Trump's order to freeze most federal grants and loans has created a panic and uncertainty within the agricultural sector, which relies on billions of dollars in direct government assistance for loans, disaster relief, and conservation practices, many of which have been around since the days of FDR, and farmers have begun to rely on them. Now, if you've watched the news at all, you know that a federal judge blocked the order on Tuesday. The problem is, and what the media isn't telling you, is that farmers and ranchers over the last week to 10 days have begun to receive letters telling them that the government may not be able to live up to the promises they made in these signed contracts with farmers and ranchers to improve conservation and increase productivity on the farm. Sadly, I watched one cattle farmer video last night in the state of Missouri where he said that he's going to fall $80,000 short in funding because the government promised him that if he and his family invested in good conservation practices, they would support his efforts with grants and loans. He received a letter in the past 10 days telling him that they couldn't keep their promise even though they have a signed contract. And as a direct result, he's going to fall $80,000 short on his spring loan payment. And the only option he has right now is to sell his cattle. And he needs those cattle because those cattle are going to have calves, and he needs those calves to pay his fall payment. It's a no-win situation, and it's not his fault. My friends, this is the problem with electing a president that knows nothing about agriculture and placing people at the Department of Agriculture whose only understanding of growing crops and raising livestock is what they learned in a YouTube video on the plane on their way to Washington, D.C. To give you an example of the size of the problem, farmers received more than $10.5 billion in direct government payments in 2024. Nearly half of which came from conservation programs, and that figure doesn't include federal crop insurance, which accounted for over $19 billion just in 2022 alone. And the consequences not only impact a farmer's ability to pay his loans, they also run the risk of costing farmers the land itself. As an example, the federal government approved a $2.3 million low-interest federal loan to replace drainage tiles in Montgomery County, Illinois. The loan was part of a $307 million USDA grant program to modernize rural drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. And for those of you that didn't grow up on a farm, drainage tiles or pipes buried under farmland carry away excess water. Farmers began using them in the 1890s, and many of these tiles in Montgomery County, Illinois are collapsing, and that causes flooding. And flooding prevents farmers from planting their crops. Now, farmers are starting to understand the extent of Trump's lack of knowledge, and they're starting to speak out. One farmer was quoted as saying, "Trump has no knowledge, zero knowledge of what's important relating to agriculture, especially agricultural drainage." Unless you think that the grant programs spelled out in the freeze are the only way the Trump administration is attacking small family farms and ranches, remember this. This is just one piece of the puzzle. Before attempting to freeze federal grants and loans, Trump signed an executive order suspending all Inflation Reduction Act funding, including the USDA's Partnership for Climate, Smart Commodities, and a program aimed at supporting sustainable farming practices. The Inflation Reduction Act is a cornerstone of former President Joe Biden's climate policy, and it allocated $400 billion in funding and tax credits to spur conservation and green energy efforts. And many people don't know that billions of those dollars went into agriculture. Now, I know it's easy for Americans who are not involved in agriculture to simply say, well, that's who they voted for, or FAFO. But I'm simply asking everyone to remember that 30% of farmers and ranchers did not vote for Donald Trump. And the consequences of our inability to raise the amount of food that we need to grow to feed our country, and to grow the amount of livestock that we need to grow to feed our country and the world, will be felt mostly by poor people, the elderly, and children, more than anybody else. Now, I made a decision yesterday that from now on, when I do these videos, I'm going to end them with a call to action to tell people what they can do to make a difference. And here's your call for action. I'm asking everyone who watches this video and cares about food prices and the small family farm and ranch to call your elected officials, whether they're a Democrat or Republican, and tell them that the federal government needs to keep its word to small family farms and ranches. They need to provide the money that they promised they would provide for conservation efforts, improve farming, and increase productivity on the family farm. Farmers were counting on this when they signed the paper and spent the money that they spent. And don't let your politicians tell you that farmers aren't in danger. These letters have already gone out, and farmers have already been notified that they may not receive the funds that they were promised. And any politician that tells you otherwise is either sorely misinformed or they're lying to you. And I'm going to ask you to do one other thing. Please follow me here on TikTok and on YouTube. On YouTube, we go under the name Westmoreland Pops. And join the Back 40, because we're fighting every day to improve life in rural America and to stand up against politicians who claim to support rural Americans but vote every day against their best interests. If we combine our voices and we work together, we can make a positive difference and bring about critical change. Thanks, everybody. My name's Will. That's the news from the Back 40, and I hope you have a great day.